let's finish up chapter 5 on human rights. My rights, whose duties? We're now looking at the final section, 5.6. Can there be rights without identifiable duty bearers? All right, so Griffin says, look, you can argue that, there's a human right or a right to Z exists, Z exists, and you don't know, without knowing against whom to make the claim. So you're kind of ignorant. You're not sure, right? But he says something like this. So epistemically, you might be unsure about it. I'm not quite sure. But what you can't argue, what he thinks doesn't make sense, is when you say something like this. Yes, that I would say that the human right to Z exists, but there is no way to specify who the duty bearer is, right? Well, why? Why is that a problem? Well, look, this is, rights to something are really claims against whom, or an institution, like a person or an institution. So you might say, there's a right. I'm not sure exactly which person it's against or which institution. So in that sense, you're ignorant to a certain degree. You're ignorant in the sense of, I don't know, where exactly the duty bearer is. But you're saying something like, I know it's an institution, right? So it's identifiable as an institution, but right now I'm not sure which institution or which person is the duty bearer. So you're saying something that my ignorance is a limited ignorance. It's not a full-blown ignorance. It's just I'm saying that I may not know whom to make the claim. But this is a broader, a deeper kind of ignorance, if you like, that you're saying, yeah, there's a human right or a right to Z exists, and or you could phrase it however you like, but you're saying that in principle, there's no specify, there's no way that you can identify the duty bearer, and in this sense, Griffin is saying this is kind of nonsense. You can't talk like this, right? To say that there's a right to something, but we can never say who is the duty bearer. That's sort of a vacuous kind of way of talking. So in that sense, now he says, look, there's all kinds of play in this one, the ignorance one, because the right to something exists without knowing against exactly whom, and that doesn't mean that the duty bearer has to be something that you could confront like you confront like an object, like a table. It could be something quite abstract, and we're used to this. Maybe it's this kind of philosophical talk that we're not quite used to, but something like quite abstract, like a justice system, right? A justice system can have certain kinds of obligations to individuals, but you don't really encounter directly the justice system. You might encounter representatives of it or in certain instantiations of it, but it's sort of the whole system is the duty bearer. So, he's trying to make the argument that there's sort of a limited amount of play in this, but it can't be the case that there's absolutely, in principle, no specific or specifiable duty bearer. So can there be rights without identifiable duty bearers? No, there can't. But what's interesting enough, and it sort of follows from our previous discussion about ability, is you can have sort of an abstract notion of a possible agent that can bear an ability. And in other words, you could have sort of a right or a human right to that exists even though no duty bearer exists. Think about when I was talking about Griffin's example of some sort of disease that a local government or a local national government or state government could not accommodate, wouldn't have the funds, it wouldn't have the scientific knowledge or whatever. And then we said, well, maybe this ability, right, and that's our deontic principle of ought implies can, the local government can't meet it. So then we just simply said, oh, well, maybe it would be a wealthy government that would meet that condition of can. So they possibly have the necessary condition of can being met. So maybe then we argue about whether or not it's sufficient condition that they should actually bear that obligation to do something about it. But what about if you had something where it was a disease that no government in principle, no government of the time could meet, that it was just beyond the scope. So it's an identifiable thing, like if there were a more powerful or a richer entity that maybe even had more knowledge, it could satisfy the deontic principle of, ought implies can, but it is simply the case right now that no duty bearer, nothing could meet that deontic principle, and no duty bearer actually exists. It still makes sense to say, well, if there were, and you're specifying, if there were a wealthy enough government, then they would bear the responsibility or the duty to preserve and respect this right. So you want to be clear of what Griffin is saying, is that you can there be rights without a currently existing duty bearer? Yes. But can there be rights without identifiable, so rights that cannot even be allocated in principle, a duty bearer? No, that doesn't really make any sense. But it might be the case that a right cannot be honored and protected due to certain circumstances. So he does not want to make rights absolutely contingent on a kind of social structure. So there is some kind of tension there. So outside of a social structure, sure, you might be able to say, yeah, there is a right, but maybe there's no existent structure that could be fulfilling the deontic principle of ought implies can, so that it would be the duty bearer for that. But nonetheless, it's specifiable in principle, so it doesn't violate this notion of being non-identifiable in principle. So the key thing is to understand the distinction between something exists and something being specifiable. Rights are connected to specifiable duty bearers, but not necessarily existing duty bearers. It's a subtle distinction, but an important one.